Welcome to W Report. This is an analytical transformation of an interview. Daniel Davis is a retired United States Army Lieutenant Colonel, military analyst, and author. How do you read the battlefield in Ukraine right now? Drone warfare has reshaped the fight, and after an initial Russian push to force a settlement and a long attritional phase, there are signs of Ukrainian exhaustion. Is this nearing a systemic break or a temporary dip? And what factors will decide the coming months?
Yeah, I kind of look at it in similar vein that the mechanics of war are playing out as they just nearly have to. When you have such a dramatic imbalance in the inputs that go into a war of attrition that we have here, where you have one side, the Russians, that have an advantage in the air, they have an advantage in air defense, advantage in the armaments of war, their industrial capacity, and above all, in the manpower pool, just the number of people for which they can draw. And the other side, the Ukraine side, is deficient in all those categories, and in many ways they're actually growing further apart as time goes on, especially in the manpower pool as well. The only place where you have parity is in the drones, and that is a big issue. That's a big one because it's not decisive, but it has dramatically changed the nature of modern warfare on the conventional level. And so that advancement in capacity has enabled the Ukraine side with fewer men to lose slower. It's not going to change the outcome. It's not going to change the nature of an attritional war because they still keep losing men every day. They still keep imposing casualties on the Russian side every day, but not as many because of how the Russians fight. And there's just not as many Ukrainian men. And you've seen over the last 4 or 5 months, especially, and Julian Ripka, the German journalist, has really chronicled a lot of this. The density of forces on the Ukraine side keeps shrinking. I've actually introduced or interviewed on my channel some journalist from the Ukraine side who's been multiple times on the front line, and he said his own observation matches that he's seen the number of Ukrainian men that have they're targeted with defending a certain sector or a certain city or village. They keep shrinking. There's not as many of them. And now then you see the Russians are also they're advancing in how they're fighting the war. And so, these so-called meat waves that they are alleged to have done earlier on, now then they're not even allegedly doing that. Now then they minimize the number of troops that actually get to the point of contact, and they're using a lot more flanking maneuvers much more effectively because they have the troops. They can do it. They have the reserves. The Ukraine side doesn't. And when they start having a penetration or a loss in one area, they have to move troops from somewhere else. But then the Russians will then increase the pressure in that point, and they start going back. And it's just like putting your finger in the dike. You run out of fingers, but the holes keep coming and the water keeps leaking. And I think that's kind of where we are. And when you look at the current context of the battlefield, you see that especially around the Pokrovsk, which is kind of the central part, and that's definitely the Russian main effort right now. They have supporting efforts in Kupiansk on the northern part of the Eastern Front, and in Kherson on the southern part of the Eastern Front. But that Pokrovsk area and the Konstantinovka in the area, there's a couple of different pockets forming there. Kupiansk is forming a pocket. Russian troops are there. They're inside the city, in the outskirts there. They're inside the city of Pokrovsk. That literally could fall within a matter of weeks now. It's been remarkable, and it's a testament to the fighting capability of the Ukraine side. It's held out this long. But there is a breaking point, and I think they're getting close to it there. And if that falls too, and depending on how it falls, it could open up additional avenues for the Russian army to exploit further. They're already in the Dnipropetrovsk area. They're also in the Sumy area. They're in the Kharkiv area. So you see there's many places where fighting is going on. The Ukraine side simply doesn't have the manpower and the resources to forever defend and not eventually crack somewhere.
Davis lays out attritional logic. Russia holds advantages in air defense, industry, and manpower, while drone parity slows losses but does not change the end state. The picture of thinning Ukrainian lines and emerging pockets sounds plausible, yet rests on patchy testimony and fuzzy geography. with no numbers on force density, production, or casualties. The core wager is that Russia sustains tempo longer than Ukraine holds. To turn this into analysis, we need specific anchor towns, timelines, force ratios, and ammunition expenditure. If Russia has the edge in air power, air defense, industry, and manpower, and Ukraine is taking heavier losses, why do Western media claim Ukraine has favorable attrition? What data supports that claim, and why does it diverge from what we see on the battlefield?
I was actually on an X post live show with some folks that were very much pro-Ukrainian, and it's ironic because I am pro-Ukrainian people. I am all for protecting the people, and the continuation of this war is the worst thing imaginable for the people and the country of Ukraine. So I very much care much more about the Ukraine side than I do about the Russian side. But when you take a look at what's actually happening and then you try to reconcile that with the statements and words, it's just what we want to be true. On this particular X show I was talking about there, someone was talking like they had seen a textbook somewhere, a military textbook that said the attacking force has to have a 3-to-1 advantage over the defending force because the defending force can draw the attackers in and then they can kill more of them. That's why you need a 3-to-1 advantage. That's what he read in a book, apparently. And I'm like, okay, that's in a book, and that is a general truism. But the way this fight is being done now is the Russians have adopted and changed their tactics and how they approach these, so they don't just go slamming in there. They prioritize their troops at the expense of the other side. So at the expense of speed, probably is a better way to put it. So Russia is willing to take a lot longer to achieve an objective by prioritizing firepower, drones, missiles, artillery, rockets, airstrikes, etc. And they will pulverize an area as opposed to sending in, a big infantry or armor wave to try to punch through something like that. So that makes it go a lot slower. But that also means that the Ukraine side is under a withering level of fire. And the idea that the side that's under the massive fire bombardment and the disparity is going to suffer less casualties than the guys who are taking it slow and easy, it just doesn't stand up. But most people in the West don't care about what the reality is. They only care about what the narrative is. And so it keeps people supporting the war because nobody's paying attention to this. Not many regular Americans or regular Europeans are doing the detailed analysis that I'm talking about right here. They just hear the narratives that's spoken by these so-called experts, and they see four-star generals or members of parliament or leaders of different countries, and they say these statements and they just take them at face value because that I want to. If anything that makes it sound like it's worse for Russia is good for most in the West. And so these leaders exploit that and they move on. Problem is, you can only keep that up so long because the actual realities on the battlefield will eventually play out. And at some point, spin and truth are going to clash, and truth will win out 100% of the time. You can't spin the realities. At some point, truth wins out.
How do you explain Trump's shift on Ukraine? He once acknowledged Russia's concerns about NATO expansion and blamed Biden. Now he talks about a ceasefire overseen by European peacekeepers and barely mentions NATO. Is this misunderstanding of Moscow's aims or deliberate tactics?
It's unclear to me. I think it's probably going to be largely irrelevant. There's not going to be any peace to keep. The only conditions that will allow a diplomatic end to this war, to where the war could literally stop overnight, is if the Ukraine side capitulates to all the political requirements of Russia, which are draconian. There's no question about that. It's virtually impossible for Ukraine to do it, though they should. The only reason we're in this position now is because we have refused, as you pointed out earlier in this episode here. We had many diplomatic off-ramps over the years, both before the war started to prevent it, as well as many going on through it, and we have rejected them all. This is the cost for having failed to prevent the war from coming on or take any of these other diplomatic off-ramps. The most recent one was June of 2024, and then now the one we're currently in right now. Every time we have said no to the off-ramp and kept going, the conditions got worse. And so that's where we are now. These draconian positions, negotiating positions that Russia would stop the fighting if they get, are going to be far worse if we keep going, and until Russia finally just says, all right, we're not even worried about a negotiation anymore. We're merely going to conquer on the ground what we think we need to ensure our security against the entire Western world. And however they choose to define that, that's what's left. And then there won't be any terms. They'll just be, this is what you get from what we haven't destroyed, etc. So it's going to get worse, and so I don't think that there's going to be any kind of a negotiated settlement. I think we've lost a chance for that, and I think that it'll be sealed.
As the deadline expires, does the risk of direct United States action against Russia rise? Senator Lindsey Graham urges escalation and strikes. Dmitry Medvedev issues stark warnings. Trump vowed to end the war quickly, but is he increasingly owning it? What is the real risk of a direct clash?
It's always possible. That's been my number one concern from day one of this war, that while one of the key reasons that we needed it for our own national interest to get it off the table so that we eliminate that possibility. Every day the war continues on, that risk remains. And the longer it goes, frankly, the higher the risk is that somebody either makes a bad decision, they miscalculate, they misinterpret something, or they think they can get away with, just crossing this red line a little bit, but not realizing that the other side has said, no, that is a hard one. If you cross that, then I will. And you don't know where that's going to be. It is the height of absurdity would be for the United States, and that means Donald Trump, because he's the commander in chief right now, to take any military action whatsoever against Russia. It was either Newt Gingrich yesterday, or it might have been Blumenthal, or maybe even Lindsey Graham, I can't recall which one it was, that said, yeah, what we need to do is get more on the other side of August 9th. We need to get more aggressive with long-range stuff that will target more effectively strikes deeper inside of Russia, enabling the Ukraine side to do that with American capability or so. Because the problem is, I think that this is one of, when I say miscalculation, there are clearly those in the West that think, well, we did stuff with ATACMS, with the Storm Shadow, with some of these other long range missiles, and it didn't spawn in war. Russia didn't attack Germany with TARS missiles, or when they use TARS missiles, or any of that kind of stuff. So they never will. So we can be a little bit more aggressive in doing it. And what we don't know is that where the Russian patience has exhausted, where that comes into where, and there's lots of folks inside Russia, I can promise you, that have been angry at Putin for not having responded earlier. And we don't know where that could finally trigger Putin to say, that's it. The straw that broke camel's back, so to speak, was finally reached. And all of a sudden they do something that they may calculate. Okay, this is just an answer in kind. This is just to send a message to you. We're going to hit this ammo depot in Poland or in Romania, or maybe this weapons factory for the TARS missile in Germany itself, etc., just as a warning. And then all of a sudden everybody gets freaked out. It's Article 5 time. And suddenly we've got this war that all too easily could go nuclear. That is my big fear, and one of the big reasons why we need to get this thing over with as soon as possible. But as long as the war continues, room for stupidity, miscalculation, misinterpretation will remain alive that potentially could harm us all.
In Davis's view, attrition follows resource logic. Russia leads through advantages in air power, air defense, industry, and manpower, while drone parity only slows the trend. The claim of favorable Ukrainian losses is a narrative, not a numbers case. A ceasefire looks unlikely, and the risk of a Russia-United States miscalculation grows over time. The outcome turns on mobilization, air defenses, and real aid volumes, reflected in offensive tempo and the depth of strikes. Thanks for watching. Support the channel if you find this format valuable. More deep dives are coming soon. Until then, think for yourself and draw your own conclusions.